I'm live apparently. Hello, Babs. How are you? Can you hear me okay? Have we got a good volume going? Well, I never touch the volume basically. Um, but I do have a funny, as you probably know, greetings randomity. I have a funny hearing problem. Um, so I usually need somebody to tell me if I'm shouting or not. Because I can't actually tell, which is actually the reason behind the problem with all the sound issues on the videos. So give us a wee shout if you can hear me, okay, folks, and we'll get chatting. Hi randomity and hi hello Babs. How are you all both tonight? Keeping well, I hope. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I'll keep chatting away until I get a wee sort of confirmation from somebody. Um, Yeah, but yes, tonight's episode was a wee bit of a short one, and it's really just that introductory part of really setting up the Butlerian Jihad and the events that it'll cause within the Dune universe, and how it alters fundamentally human evolution and also machine evolution. So let's see, have we got are we? I still haven't got anything from anybody here, so we're. I'm just gonna give a wee. Can you all hear me? On the text there. Let's see if we're okay. Excuse me. I wonder how old Herbert was when he read Elron. It's an interesting question, randomity. I still not. Could somebody give me a wee yes? We can hear you, please. If that's okay. Um, oh, you can hear me. Thank you, randomity. Sorry about that. That's just I like to get sort of confirmation. I don't know, but there's a body of literature that he reads at the time, and it's one of these things that I think I was talking a wee bit the other day about Herbert can be a wee bit deceptive about where he gets his ideas from. And there is one particular thing, and whenever we get to it, I will point it out to you, and it'll really make you think, yeah, if you see what I mean. It's a wee bit down the road, but it's to do with Herbert's definition of ecology and Paul Sears' definition, etc. Um, but I think he sort of gets out of his family house at a certain point when he's young, and he's a child born in 1920. So if you think about what's available to read for Frank Herbert, it makes sense that those kind of the what you would call the fin de sequel fiction, the end of the cycle, this golden age of literature, which is hello Sean, which is kind of from the 1850s onwards, and you could argue it basically ends with World War One, but there's a few books that kind of might sort of drift over that kind of time period. Um, but the simple fact is that's the thing. We don't kind of get it on the list of what things he would read, but you get the impression that if you're reading this kind of literature at the time, then you'd be reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, Arthur Conan Doyle, Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, um, and the Victorian writers there's a lot of stuff comes out of Victorian science, the Victorian era, that is science fiction, and also, in fact, there's a bit of a boom in that. Well, what we call the scientific romances, I suppose. It's just another term for science fiction. Um, but particularly, the popularity of the likes of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells is enormous. As is, Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, for example. And there's also the what is it, Gulliver Jones, is it, of Mars? There's a couple of Gullivers of Mars, isn't there? Different books, but there's a whole pile of stuff, and even things like Tarzan, I suppose. So I'd imagine that body of literature. You've even got the kind of stuff into Africa, like H. Rider Haggard, that kind of thing, like King Solomon's Mines and She. All that stuff's enormously popular in the 19th century, and even within on the other side of the water, you've got Mark Twain, who's fantastic. Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote the John Carter. John Carter is who I'm thinking on. John Carter of Mars. Who did I say? Gulliver Jones of Mars is the other one. Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote John Carter of Mars. There's another sort of hero of Mars, and I was getting him mixed up, and I think he's called Gulliver Jones. randomly. Check that out. But yes, sorry, absolutely, John Carter of Mars, um, which is excellent stuff, by the way. And I don't know if anybody saw the film that came out a few years ago. That was the Disney movie. I think it's just John Carter, isn't it? I think it's called. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And again, I kind of grew up on that kind of look of science fiction. And I think again, people maybe were disenfranchised from it or something because of it. It's set on Mars, and we know stuff about Mars that, if you go back to Percival Lovell and his oh, Scapioli. I'm getting mixed up. My old brain's a bit fuddled these days. But the idea of canals on Mars, and that with that idea is kind of what spurred these books, if you see what I mean. But I don't know. The John Carter film got panned, and it was a big loss, I think, was it a Disney film. But I really enjoyed it, and I thought it had an excellent cast of actors. And I thought it was a really fun film, and I thought a great introduction to those Mars books. Hello, Grimdark. How are you? Thanks for joining. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. By the way, so he must have been quite young when he read Erewhon. Erewhon, I think, is quite a well-known book at a certain period, as is Vril, The Coming Race. There's a whole load of esoteric hoo-ha about Vril, and these secret societies that actually believe that there's that the Vril are real, and that there's this subterranean lizard people who are going to pop up and take over the world, etc. Burroughs even before Robert E. Howard. Yes, good bit. Burroughs is Tarzan as well, isn't he? And Burroughs has got quite a big output, and I haven't read an awful lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs, but an awful lot of the stuff was kind of turned into certainly the Tarzan. I think was pretty good when I was young, watching the old RKO movies with Johnny Weissmuller. And again, it can be. I think we were talking about how do you get introduced to things. The other day, like the film Dune led me to the books of Dune rather than the other way around. And old things, particularly those old RKO movies, led me to the likes of Sherlock Holmes and Tarzan and stuff like that. So there we go. So yeah, but he must have been quite young. But it's I mean, there's too much in it that is overtly there in Dune, and there are big ideas that are in Erewhon. That's what really makes it quite an important book, I think. Samuel Butler is quite an important figure in the Victorian era towards the end. He is excuse me, he is that guy that rails against Victorian society with great vehemence. And I've done a fair bit of reading in and around him, and if you look within my bibliography again, you'll find a good selection of books about Samuel Butler and about Erewhon, and in particular, The Way of All Flesh is seen as highly iconoclastic to British society, and very damning and very, very vehement, I think. And an interesting thing about the Way of All Flesh was it was published, I think, a year after Butler died. But apart from that, he's really very much remembered for that very vicious kind of spat. But as I said, it was a one-way spat. It was him attacking Darwin. And Darwin was, I think, a bit, based on the research that I did, I think Darwin was a little bit intimidated by him and didn't kind of respond and like. And I think interestingly enough, I think their families knew each other. So there was actually a connection there. So there we go. So the video tonight is setting up really that's the connection between Butler's Erewhon and Dune. That there's quite a bit, and of course, what we're going to look at in terms of the theme of evolution is how the Butlerian jihad itself affects society, which affects the development of machines and therefore also the development of people. And the idea that technology can be a crutch. And it's very much that idea that you get a little bit of possible prediction from Samuel Butler in Erewhon about the possibilities of this. And it's if you read Erewhon and follow it quite well, you'll really understand that Frank Herbert it's kind of almost like Samuel Butler throws the ball and Herbert picks it up and runs with it totally. It's if we need a metaphor for it. Percival Lovell started the Mars craze at the turn of the century, says Randomity, claiming the canals of Mars were built by a dying civilization. Yeah, and that idea is a big thing. Thank you very much. I really do rely on my memory a lot, and I often I'll fact check things occasionally afterwards. But hello, Aqua Baby. Hello, how are you? So that idea runs all the way through to things like Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. That the idea of canals on Mars is one of those very romantic, I think, ideas that came out of that time, and it's attached to science. And again, the idea that the scientific romance would run with it, I think, is very good. I love the world of John Carter. The literary world of John Carter is, and I haven't read all of them. Read a couple, and a long time ago. Again, I sort of grew up with getting books out of the library and buying secondhand books and then having to trade them back. But a lot of the time you would get series of books where, very sadly, you would get book 3 or book 5 of a series or something like that, but you would never get a book 1. And it was often books like this, and books by Michael Moorcock as well, and so on. But it's setting up this really, and Erewhon is a great book, and I just having me think about those kind of science fiction books at the time. Sort of some motifs that are in, and we have a lot of before H.G. Wells' Time Machine. Generally, how you get to the future is by falling asleep, and the sleeper must awaken, that kind of thing. Did you ever read Starship Stormtroopers essay from Michael Moorcock? Moorcock only briefly criticized Frank Herbert, but it was a long criticism of American science fiction writers he disliked. No, I've got a few bits and pieces by Moorcock. So all that was from Grimdark. It's a really good little set of points and questions there. I'm well aware of Moorcock's dislike of American science fiction because he was very vocal about it at the time. Excuse me. And I've met Michael Moorcock. I thought he was lovely, by the way. He was very jet lagged when I met him, and I've got a couple of books signed by him. Only briefly criticized, but it was a long criticism of American science fiction writers he disliked. It's probably quite a long list. To be honest, of Grimdark, I must have a wee look at it. There's a few interesting kind of wee essays out there. I have actually one on the machine here. I must have a wee look and see what I've got in my folder. Starship Stormtroopers essay from Michael Moorcock. Starship Troopers is a particularly interesting book, I think. I think it's a very, very good book. And I think it has a very, if I'm remembering correctly, it has a moment in it where you realize that Johnny Rico is not white. Basically, it's a moment to think in the mirror. I might be wrong, and I think I think it might have been someone like Samuel Delaney or something, who I think was it Time magazine described him as the hippest man on the planet once because he was gay, black, and a science fiction writer. I think it was something to do with his moment of realization when he realized that the character was black, which I think is quite interesting. I might be wrong on that. My memory is very fuzzy on a lot of things because I've really read a lot of this stuff a long time ago. I suppose the good point is if I can get around to digging it all up, I can have a look at some of it. Rick was Filipino in the book. There we go. Thank you, Grimdark. But he's most certainly not how he's portrayed in the Starship in the Starship Troopers film. It's all about white supremacists in that, isn't it? But very deliberately, I think, in the film. I think the film's a good critique of it in some ways. The publishing history of Starship Troopers and how Heinlein had to get a bunch of these books out is quite interesting because nobody would publish them, I suppose. So I think they often got published through. I was trying to get them published. It was eventually published as a children's book, I think, and so Starship Troopers is often associated with, I suppose the term that I've heard associated with it a lot is juvenile literature, which is quite harsh and not true. I think it was just a trick of his to get it published. Do personal stuff. So no, sorry, I haven't read it, but I'll absolutely have a wee look at it. Moorcock's got a lot of editorial stuff and a lot of comments out there. Grimdark, and I suppose a lot of the stuff that I sourced from him was just various things from New Wave, or sorry, from New Worlds, and the New Worlds collections often have wee editorials from him. Heinlein, I don't think was a fascist, to be frank. He liked playing around with different ideas in his books. I don't think Robert Heinlein was a fascist at all. And I understand he comes in for a lot of criticism. I think it's that kind of forward thinking. And you can definitely see a shift in Heinlein's work. There's definitely a change in the man, and he's very much one of those writers of the '60s. So he's a bit far out there, man. You've got to grok if you get the reference. You have to grok Heinlein in fullness, and just because an author presents certain ideas doesn't mean they actually run with them themselves. But yes, I absolutely agree with you, Grimdark. He liked playing around. I mean, boy, does he play around with different ideas in his books. I can tell you a wee bit about the ones that are. I suppose if you're a Dune fan, and if you want to understand the kind of the prominence of Dune coming out of the '60s within the counterculture, it's got quite a bit to do with I suppose what's popular in the American universities and the underground at the time. So that the three books really that took off there were The Lord of the Rings, Dune itself, and Heinlein's Strange in a Strange Land. And they all do have environmental themes. They have all got messiahs, and they've all got a lot to do with water. Again, I think we'll chat about them in a wee bit. The commentary over the internet conversations about Heinlein immediately turned to accusations of fascism. That's sad. The word fascist is quite an interesting word. Comes from the Roman Empire. Judgment Day by Al Feldstein. Sean Whelan says is like that too. Twist ending at the end. So no, I don't think. I think the thing that Heinlein peddles is, what do we call it? The competent man. I believe he's not. And I think also if you look at, he has that Messiah character in Valentine Smith, who's a great character, by the way. And if you haven't read Stranger in a Strange Land, that period from Heinlein onwards, everything's odd. It's weird. It's I think it's kooky, but I think it's very interesting. I think he's a great writer, and I don't know what you guys think. If any of you well versed in Heinlein, I have a bunch of his books here somewhere. They're probably downstairs actually, but in particular, Stranger in a Strange Land, Time Enough for Love, and the Number of the Beast is way out there. It's absolutely bizarre as hell, and it's about pan-dimensional multi-person solipsism. There you go. Heinlein. Sean saying Heinlein wasn't fascist, but there's a strain of Marxist sympathizers in literary publishing houses, and have been ever since the 1920s. Communism was considered fashionable by intellectuals. Yeah, there's, I suppose, the emerging out of the 1910s into the 20s, and I think you have issues with that in America with the whole McCarthyism and stuff like that. In literary publishing houses have been ever since the 20s. Comics considered fashionable by intellectuals. Yeah, intellectuals. I mean, all of these things come and go, don't they? Everybody's got a system. That think that everybody comes up with a system and thinks it's a one glove fits all. It was at least a social liberal with his racial views and views on sexuality. I think so. I'm not fully read. Again, I've read Starship Troopers. Another one of those kind of juvenile books that I read that I don't think is juvenile at all, and I think is absolutely brilliant. If you want to get a real sense of a science fiction writer trying to do a science fiction kind of job for his readers, And again, it's about that competent man idea. It's called Have Spacesuit Will Travel, and I couldn't recommend it more. It's I've only read it a couple of times, but it's a book I just sort of grabbed, and I have a bunch of Heinlein that I haven't read yet. I haven't read his Red Planet yet, for example, and I absolutely loved it and adore the book. And yeah, so the idea of the competent man, as I would consider myself a competent man, is vastly opposed to the idea of an Ubermensch, which is just a fantasy. Um, to be honest with you. So, and to be honest with his views, I don't know anything about his racial views. I don't, to be honest with you, I would have to, or maybe I do, but I wouldn't, he doesn't strike me as a racist, and not certainly not from his books. And his views on sexuality have to be what you would call very liberal and very ahead of his time, I think. But I really love, Heinlein's a fun. I'll tell you something about Heinlein, folks. You might, for those who've read him, the bigger books, I always think he loses the plot about 2/3 in, and there's always, it's almost like a kind of if you were talking about music, you would almost call it your middle eighth, but it's and the momentum changes and there's a shift, and there's almost a philosophical shift, and I think it's the point where most people would put his books down. And if you can get through that, those wee bits, and I would say it's in Stranger in a Strange Land, and Time Enough for Love, which is a fantastic book. But he has these wee kind of just, and he keeps the momentum in his writing going. But these books are quite chunky, so that to me they're always good value. If you're like myself and didn't have too much money when you're growing up, the biggest book for the least amount of money tended to be what you wanted. So William Jones won a Pulitzer Prize for his denial of the Holodomor in the New York Times. Again, sorry, Sean, I don't know anything about that one, I'm afraid. Love Heinlein's competent man archetype. Yeah, I think that's his enduring contribution to science fiction. Heinlein's an engineer, I think, so he thinks like one. But I think it's so obvious that the 60s, I don't know what he was smoking or whatever, but the 60s he's a very free. I totally associate him with the 1960s, and excuse me, pardon me for the flies again. It's that time of year, but I would associate Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land with the 60s as much as I would Woodstock, or that kind of thing. I find that quite sad. That, I mean, we can pick apart an author from the future and look back on them and identify and isolate aspects of their personality, but they're only tiny aspects of a person's personality out of a lifetime. And we all learn and we all grow. We all do stupid things. We all say stupid things. So I'm not altogether into the whole vilification of some writers. Plenty of writers and talented people are absolute scumbags, to be honest with you. But I firmly believe in separating the person from their art, I suppose. Neil Stevenson has that problem too. Hard to wrap up a book. That's that cyberpunk chap you were talking about the other day, Sean. Sean, folks, very quickly, because of the books you were talking about the other day, I grabbed a couple of things just to stick them on the shelf to show you. As much as we're the science fiction station, just that was the Elric book we were talking about. The Weird of the Weird of the White Wolf, which was the wee sort of pseudo reference in the production card at the time. Starship Troopers, A Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Strange in a Strange Land, all different thought experiments by Heinlein. I've got A Moon is a Harsh Mistress here and haven't got round to reading it. Sean, so someone was asking really about stuff on the biography of Frank Herbert and just getting a wee bit of extra info. So there's also this book, again, you're probably aware of it, is The Road to Dune. And that's Frank Herbert, Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson. It's got various different things, but it has got some, there's some short stories, deleted scenes, etc. from Dune, and I suppose various wee bits of Wit and Wisdom that came out a good wee while back. Put that down there. There we go. Deus Ex Machinus from Murakami is frustrating. I have a theory about that. I don't know if any of you read the George R.R. Martin books. but there's an awful lot of Michael Moorcock's Elric in that, and in particular towards the end. And I think it's not. I don't think it's in the TV series at all, but there's a horn involved, and it has something to do with the wall, and it smacks me massively of the Horn of Fate from the end of the Elric book. The interesting thing about the Deus Ex Machina is, if you like, if the I wonder if Valerians and the Melnor are incredibly similar, and I thought they had a bit of cheek in the show actually, bringing the name Stormbringer into it with, was it King Joffrey's sword or something like that? Is Stormbringer, which is such a weapon, pales in massive significance to Stormbringer. Can I ask, are you all familiar with Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné and what Stormbringer is? Because if you're not aware, I could sort of spoil a few things here for you, and I wouldn't want to, but they're fantastic books. George R. R. Martin brought the idea of Warring Houses from Dune. Yeah, I think George R. R. Martin's main skill is assembling other stuff and representing it. To be honest with you, if you have a good knowledge of science fiction, fantasy literature, I think the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire, is very derivative. I'm not, but don't worry about spoiling it. Well, it's to do with what Grimdark is talking about a Deus Ex Machina. I'm quite familiar with Moorcock about Red Elric, Hawkman, Corrin for his Eternal Champion works. Excellent, they're all good stuff there. Grimdark. How the Elric world ends, and if simply put, the Eternal Champion is the same character in a way, but he has various shades, and it involves heavily myths from around the world. But simply put, if you think about it, you've got a hero, a kind of sidekick, and a weapon, and they're constantly reincarnated. So the end, I suppose the Deus Ex Machina in the Elric stories, and I know there's stories that move around the original lot, Grimdark, but is that it's an all-out war at the end of the world kind of thing, and Elric wins, but the only people left standing are him, his buddy Moonglum, and he's got the sword, Stormbringer, and he has the Horn of Fate. And so the idea is that it's the multiverse with these books. So each hero ends and becomes another. The new worlds get created, and the fundamental thing about these books is that the good and evil are irrelevant. It's all about order and chaos. So he doesn't have. Elric is the antithesis of Conan, a deliberate antithesis of Conan. So Conan starts off as a slave, and through adversity and strength becomes eventually a king by his own hand. And Elric starts off as an emperor and ends up, giving it all up, and is so physically weak that he takes drugs to stay alive. And ultimately, the sword Stormbringer is a vampiric sword that whenever he kills someone, it actually feeds its energy, and so it allows him to kind of have a normal life. The sword isn't really it's not a vampire at all, and the sword isn't really a sword. So for those who know, Stormbringer is a god who's imprisoned inside imprisoned inside a sword, and his entire purpose is to kill gods. And it is indeed, as Grimdark says, is a blade of chaos. It's a beautiful, depending on who's drawn it, you often see that sort of Celtic leaf form type blade, and a few is it the Raven Armory, I think, used to make copies of it. But the whole point is to make the new world, the new set of stories come about, the Horn of Fate has to be blown, and it's the thing that brings around the new life matrix, if you like. And Elric doesn't have the strength to do it. So what happens is his mate Moonglum says, kill me with the sword and suck my soul out, basically. And he does this, but his mate screams in horror. Nobody quite realizes really the true horror of what that means. And it feeds him its energy, and it allows him to blow the horn. So if you don't want to know how Stormbringer ends, hit mute for 1 minute. But basically how it ends, here goes, so hit mute now if you don't want me to spoil it for you, is that the sword flies up in the air and runs him through, and sucks his soul out, and kills him. And so the only thing left is the sword as the world reforms around it. And I think the last lines of the Elric saga are spoken by Stormbringer itself. And I think, if I'm remembering right, it says, "Farewell, my friend. I was 1,000 times more evil than you could have possibly imagined." Something like that. I think I'm now learning that's what the Demon Blood Sword and Adventure Town is supposed to be a reference to. Stormbringer is, and there's music about this sword. Bane of the Black Sword and stuff out of from Hawkwind and stuff. Michael Moorcock was in this band. So Michael Moorcock's very much involved in the 60s and the music and the culture and the science fiction, fantasy, and in so many ways. Games Workshop took a lot from Moorcock for Warhammer as well. Yeah, and I suppose he also demonstrated really good skills as an editor. So depending on who you are, you either think of Moorcock as a science fiction writer, you might think of him as a fantasy writer, but he's the man behind the revitalization of New Worlds magazine. He's its editor, quite a young editor as well, and really just the driving force behind the new wave, bringing, I suppose, to the reading public, from a science fiction point of view, a lot of the stuff that's kind of considered weird, kooky, strange, avant-garde, and a lot, that wasn't getting a home in the publishing houses in America, and the likes of John Campbell weren't accepting this stuff. So it was a massive driving force for getting. I mean, a lot of this stuff that came out there is really famous today, and it'd be shocking to understand what sort of books and writers would be absent. We wouldn't have if it wasn't for New Worlds, and there's an American group within New Worlds as well, and it happens across the Atlantic too. New Worlds, Grimdark said New Worlds magazine that the editor for the New Wave was influential on American cyberpunk. Yeah, absolutely. I've done a wee video on kind of I did a wee sort of brief history of science fiction. It's on the channel, and there's from the 80s. I think it's from Cyberpunk up to the current day. It's only a very brief look at Cyberpunk, but absolutely, and I think the cyberpunk movement is looking to the new wave. It's a very fresh thing that's coming out at that time, and the idea of inner space, cyberspace. Sadly, I think we sort of say that I think it's the dream of cyberpunk isn't quite realized well. It's almost seen as a failure of the ideas that came out of the new wave and the new wave itself. I think because that kind of science fiction didn't remain popular. Um, hmm. So there we go, folks. But that horn, I think, is in George R. R. Martin's stories, and I know we haven't got that last book, but it really does reek an awful lot of stuff from Michael Moorcock's Elric stories. There's a whole bunch of other stories around the author as well, and I think we were talking about. I think some of you were talking about writing in another writer's canon. The books that I got signed by Michael Moorcock, one is actually one of my favorite books. It's called Behold the Man. And it was a special anniversary edition from America. So I wouldn't have, he brought them with him to sell. So I couldn't have bought that over here. I was delighted. But the other one was Tales of the White Wolf, I think, and it's a collection of stories in the Elric universe, and it's by people like Neil Gaiman and a collection of modern writers who dipped into that world universe, and it's introduced by Michael Moorcock, I think, with a new story in it. But Michael Moorcock, again, those old library carousels that we used to have in the public libraries in the 70s and 80s were just stacked with his books. Because he was so prolific. The multiverse is really his baby, and there are tons and tons and tons of them. And I haven't read anywhere near all of them, but I've read quite a lot of them. I have an enduring interest in cyberpunk, but you're right, it's a kind of a dead end because Western culture has stagnated from recursion since the 1990s. Everything's a remake, rehash of past works. I was watching Nemesis the other day. I don't know if you know this film. I haven't seen it in years, and I so enjoyed it. It was so good. And I think it's a pretty much a cult cyberpunk film nowadays, and I really did enjoy it enormously. And there, in terms of the books and the culture, yeah, it kind of. I think we talked about 2000 AD has always Mega City One's always had this kind of cyberpunk look to its citizens, and the kind of punk look coming out, punk era coming out of Britain in the 70s and stuff, and quite like American punk myself. I'm a bit of a Dead Kennedys fan. um, in fact, I much prefer American punk to British punk, musically. I mean, but Sean's, yeah, enduring interest. It's kind of, but it's. I think it's also one of those things where Cyberpunk's problem, I think, was its arrival at the right time, but I suppose the way the technology is moving. Um, some of it just I don't. Some it's one of those things where often some things in science fiction can be a product of its times, but I think it's a kind of our sense of reality with what the web and the internet is that didn't quite work out to be the same sort of thing presented in cyberpunk. I think we have large elements of cyberpunk in society today. But everything's a remake and rehash of past works. Yeah. Oh, you're kidding. Sorry, very quickly, I'll come back to you, Sean. Randomly just says the Marvel Comics Conan the Barbarian series has several issues with Conan meeting Elric. uh, Likewise, Jesus said in 2007, Crash has killed off a lot of the punk rock spirit in the West. Ah, right. So sorry, I've just found that Elric meeting Conan. That's a crossover that I didn't think would ever happen. That's quite interesting. They're both great characters. But they are an antithesis of each other. Everything's a remake, rehash of past works. Sean, it's funny that we were talking about this in terms of yeah, I mean the Star Trek remakes. Well, I don't know. There's some films a remake does work, and very very rarely I would say. The one that I can think of is the thing. Is it Thing from Another World? And then the remake of The Thing, and I think the old black and white one, and then the John Carpenter one. I think are both brilliant films. I love both of them. But the remakes it's a different animal altogether. But they're both very good. But and occasionally you do get cultural remakes. I think that are worthy of their interpretation. I think we talked about Macbeth the other day and Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, and particularly Akira Kurosawa has a couple of Shakespeare films, and his looking at them from I think what's the other one? Ran, I think, is King Lear, and it's fantastic. They're both the cultural sensibilities applied to Shakespeare there makes Shakespeare much more interesting. But I think there's a bit of a stagnation in culture, and somebody said I kind of did an A to Z of science fiction because I don't approve of top tens, and to me top tens, and I don't know what you think of this one, folks. I'll see you can give me a bit of feedback. Making lists of what's best about your society is often a sign historically that your society is about to collapse. So and I don't know when I say this if many people actually get that, but it's kind of true, and it kind of begins with your seven wonders of the world, etc. This kind of idea of what's so great about our society, let's catalogue it, and it is actually an endeavour at looking backwards. And usually when societies start patting themselves on their back and going, we're so wonderful, let's vote about how wonderful we are and put it into lists, you can be sure that things aren't forward thinking and moving ahead. There's a book that Ancient City about exactly that. Sean, it's absolutely true. And it's a swag song, blooming flower right before senescence. Yeah, and the thing about empires, by the way, is that they all collapse ultimately. And there's a very interesting thing about literary movements that gravitate towards the center of empire prior to that collapse. And particularly if you do study kind of, if you look at literature that's particularly colonizing and colonized kind of literature from the British Empire, you'll see a lot of writers from countries that were in the British Empire prior to up to the end of World War II, kind of gravitating towards England and particularly towards the centre of empire, towards London, to actually to write about their experiences. Ancient City by Newman, Dennis Fistel. That's it. Yeah. Thank you for these, Sean. I scribbled down what you were saying the other night about Julian Jaynes and had a brief look at it on Wikipedia, by the way. That sounds like a good book, The Ancient City by Numa. You're very well read, Sean. Dennis Fustel de Coulon. Oh, my handwriting. Anges. Bear with me a second, folks. Yes?
Just me.
I'm online. You're okay? It's all right, son. Sorry, that's just my son knocking, just saying hello. Or The Ancient City by Newman. This one's on Blu-ray before Senescence. Yes, indeed. The Ancient City by Newman Dennis Fustel de Coulon. That sounds like a good book. Sean's right up my street. Thing from Another World. Randomity says, thank you. This is so helpful, folks, by the way. Thank you for doing this. Randomity. Thing from Another World. From 1951 is rumored to have actually been directed by Howard Hawks. Yeah. That's right. He's certainly involved with it, isn't he? What's great and interesting from an archaeological point of view, maybe from a technological point of view, is that since we've drones and ground penetrating radar, a lot of these ancient cities that we've been looking at or have been excavated over years the hard way, have revealed, you know, the extent of these things, and have opened up the field of archaeology incredibly. It's like brave new world there. I'm sure they're all chomping at the bit. Sean says, yes, from British colonialism as it's popularly conceived really only existed for a decade or so right before the First World War. British colonialism is popularly conceived. I don't know. I'd say I'm in the country that says otherwise, Sean. Have a look at the plantations of Ireland. And it's interesting if you look at the intent and the people behind it as well. But arguably Northern Ireland, well, not Northern Ireland, but Ulster, the plantations of Ulster, this part of Ireland is the first part of the British Empire. But colonialism in the ancient world, I suppose, there's a need for it to a degree. It's and often with many parts of the world sort of uninhabited. The world's populations isn't always brown, but it's a thing that happens, and is obviously in this kind of post-war new century, new millennium, it's become a very controversial thing. But colonialism is how empires are built. The idea of one thing from Another World was that from Who Goes There by Joseph Campbell. That's correct. I think there's a very good cover. We've got that book in the series, and because we do talk about Joseph Campbell a fair bit when we come to the hero, and he's a very important figure in science fiction, and yeah, he's a science fiction writer as well. He's a bit kooky though. I think what we were talking about the whole kind of fascist thing and thrown at Robert Heinlein, which I totally disagree with. But excuse me, if you think about how one of the things about John W. Campbell was with his Ubermensch and stuff like that, and certain ideas, he did end up. He's very right wing, and pardon me, but the level of that, if you understand that he was friends with a lot of these science fiction writers, including Heinlein, it drove them all away, including Heinlein. They didn't want to go near him to an extent. Again, I haven't looked at him completely in depth, but I've had a good look at John W. Campbell. He's a fascinating character, and he's very important to the study of science fiction in the 20th century. And I would say, arguably, but we talk about the Herbert being a bridge between the Golden Age and the New Wave, and if we think about that bridge is really also between two very dominating editors on either side of the Atlantic. It's John W. Campbell over in America, and across the Atlantic we have Michael Moorcock. These men's vision is, as much as it's the type of science fiction that they're willing to publish and wish to publish, that ultimately gets out to you, the reader. Excuse me, flies on the camera again. Campbell also enjoyed being a contrarian to an extreme. Yeah, I think sometimes with these guys, it's all about selling magazines and books as well. Controversies often sells books. Didn't allow aliens to be used as an allegory for anything. Why Asimov used robots? There is some stuff about the three laws of robotics. Asimov will tell you that Campbell came up with them. Campbell will tell you that Asimov came up with them, which is an interesting thing that both men actually bantered that back and forth. Yeah, and it's what you don't allow is very interesting, or what you don't allow yourself to show or to look at, especially when science fiction is such an open and really thoughtful kind of genre. And there's all sorts of people who, in terms of allegory. Oh, that's okay. Sorry, I was just reading John W. Campbell, the American, and Joseph Campbell's the mythographer. Yes, indeed. It's easy to get them mixed up when we've got a bunch of Campbells in the room here. So, you know something? I watched. I'll not say who this was by or anything because I watched an episode on YouTube of a sort of science fiction thing, and featured an author who was talking about books they would not read, and this is a prominent science fiction writer, and he said he wouldn't read books by anybody who committed suicide, any author who committed suicide, and I just sort of think absolutes like that. I thought, well, okay, that's fair enough, I suppose. But as a sort of thought exercise, I decided to sort of categorize in my mind a bunch of authors. I wanted to know let's see what kind of literature would be removed from his universe by simply refusing to look at a body of literature by anyone who's committed suicide over the entire period of human existence and endeavor. And he wiped out an awful lot of very interesting people. And lessons, and I just thought it was a sad thing to do. So we often put limits on things, and I could see John Campbell not wanting to put stuff in his science fiction magazine if he didn't think it was science fiction. I suppose the other thing is that there's plenty of these magazines about at the time, so if you thought that, that they're also running fantasy magazines and horror magazines and the detective magazines as well. So pretty much, if something didn't really fit, it's not that you can't publish it or categorize it. There's another magazine for that. It's simply that he is really censoring certain ideas and certain types of things because he really wants to promote his own key ideas. And I think Campbell in particular, with I think A. Van Vogt and stuff, are responsible for peddling a lot of pseudo-religious nonsense out of using the magazine for that they had, the platform that they had. And they're definitely, I'm pretty sure they're involved in Dianetics, and getting that out there. And I don't know if I don't know too much about the Church of Scientology, but Dianetics is the work by Elron Hubbard that precedes the whole kind of Scientology thing. Pardon me. And a lot of this is coming out of ideas that they're getting. There's also a lot of it's to do with Alfred Korzybski's General Semantics. Do I have Mr. Korzybski's General Semantics here? Probably not handy. It's a book also that influenced Frank Herbert a fair bit. Maybe apocryphal. Elron Hubbard supposedly said it's sci-fi. The real, but he did actually. Yeah, that's if you're going to give one of the quotes about Hubbard, that's it. The real money is in religion. That's exactly the one. If you'd asked me, Sean, that's the one I would give you. I do know this. Excuse me. I do know that there's apparently a very good biography of Elron Hubbard, but my understanding is the books, as in a reasonably well researched book, but my understanding is it's called Ron the Nut. But if you look into Elron Hubbard's military career during World War II, it's quite interesting. Sean Lennon says, I've got a copy of General Semantics. It's a thick one. The one that I have, Sean's not that thick. It's about yay thick. And it's actually the publication of the original, I think, the seminars from 1937. It never occurred to your religion concocted by a writer as bad as Elron Hubbard. Yeah. There was a story about Hubbard and Robert Heinlein and a bar for the idea of Scientology was conceived as part of a bet, but it's probably anecdotal, the story. Yeah. And there are a lot of science fiction religions, conceived within fiction. But yes, Scientology. Thinking of science and sanity. Scientology, I think, tried to plonk a place in the middle of Belfast recently, a few years back. That was funny. They didn't stay too long, apparently. is very much to do with where they had their building, I think, as well. Hubbard's only sci-fi pulp stuff wasn't that bad. I've read Battlefield Earth, and back, I could tell you a bit of a funny story about Elron Hubbard, but I won't. I'll keep that one to myself till I have a think through whether I should tell you or not. It's a personal story, but anyway, Hubbard's one of science fiction pulp wasn't that bad. The film The Master and Allegory of Hubbard was pretty good. I haven't seen that. I must take a look at that at some point. I understood that was about him. Is that Philip Seymour Hoffman? Is that what you call it, Sean? That was in The Master. I think that film's from a few years back, isn't it? Recently got a copy of Science and Sanity. Oh, I get who's that by? Sean, Science and Sanity. I've got maybe 2012. Yes, that's the one, 2012. So I did read Battlefield Earth, and I actually listened to it on one of the old big chunky American audiobook type things that we very seldom get over here. The ones with all the cassettes in it, and there were like loads and loads of them. Science and Sanity is by Alfred Korzybski. Thank you. And I understand there's a General Semantics Institute in America, I think. You're packaging rhetoric in a different manner. That's all. That's almost all what these people do. So rhetoric, for anybody who's not too sure, is the science of is the art of persuasion, and that in itself is a piece of rhetoric because it's not. It's the art of manipulation. If you want an honest answer, that's what rhetoric is. It's how to manipulate people with words. So there we go. But yeah. So in terms of Heinlein's books, that's Hubbard's books, Battlefield Earth's the only one that I read, and it was an okay read. It really, but it didn't stick out in any particular way for me. Excuse me, fly. But there we go. Has anyone got any questions for me? Well, if you have any questions, tip or tapper away. I thought I would show you a couple of the things that we were talking about, guys, because one of you was talking about steampunk the other day. I don't read an awful lot of new authors, but I brought in three, and they're maybe not new to you, but I thought I'd recommend them. In terms of steampunk, I don't know if you know Mark Hodder. And this has become a bit of a series, but it's called The Strange Affair of Spring-Heeled Jack. If you don't know who Spring-Heeled Jack is, he's a real thing from Victorian times, bit of a bogeyman. And it's interesting because he's using Lawrence Swinburne and Richard Francis Burton as his literary characters. And if you know anything about Richard Francis Burton, I'm a big fan of his. Makes for a very good read if you like that kind of steampunk thing. A lot of junk steampunk. There's a good. Well, I think I like good literature, and this has become a series. And I've read three of them, and I know there's more, and I tend to stop before when anyone starts churning these things out because I think the quality declines. But the first couple are very, very good, and he's done his I know a lot about Richard Francis Burton and this chap Swinburne. I think it's a cracker. Particularly if you're a fan of Burton's the main hero of he's a real person obviously, but he's the main hero of Philip Jose Farmer's Riverworld series. So that was one of them, and that's by Mark Hodder, and I think they're now the Burton and Swinburne in. But if you know the characters, Richard Burton's probably the most dangerous man alive on the earth, I'd say, in the Victorian era. Tip-top classicist, great anthropologist, and you know him from Richard Burton is the guy that gave you the Kama Sutra and the really good translations of the Arabian Nights, the Thousand Nights and One Night. Just very quickly, this one is very good, and I have another. There's part of it's Chris Beckett's Dark Eden. Which is very interesting in terms of genetics, and it's I suppose a whole population on a planet that has very little natural light, and they're descended from humans from mutations and then breeding, etc. It's extremely good, actually. So the other one was just, and I know China Melville's probably quite well known, but he's quite new to me. I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. And I read this, The City and the City, and I thought this was superb. And a particular resonation, I think, for maybe people who lived somewhere like Berlin or places like Northern Ireland, for example, where there's an overlay of almost two cultures on top of each other, with people ignoring one. There's some really good books there, and I would recommend them all, folks. But I don't read very much steampunk, and I just thought I'd recommend them to you. You might like Neil Stephenson's Baroque trilogy. Semantic reactions in ES are depicted in Dune as the use of the voice. Yeah, it's general semantics, one of the big influences on the voice. Making a note to like in the Richard Francis Burton. The book there is The Devil Drives. If you want a very professional biography of Richard Francis Burton, Fawn Brody's The Devil Drives is one absolute cracking book. And if you don't know anything about Richard Francis Burton, he'll blow you away. He's a bit James Bond. He's a bit Indiana Jones. He's the guy that kind of went out to sort of find the source of the Nile. There's the Hanning Speak controversy, and yeah, he also wrote the book that I think on how to fight with a bayonet. And my understanding is it's still the book that the British Army use. I might be wrong on that, but he's a very interesting character. He supposedly, he also, I think, is the first white man to get into the Holy of Holies in Mecca and Medina. And he broke in and sketched. Well, and Babs was talking about, I think there are books that take you to other writers or other stories. Philip Jose Farmer, Riverworld says, introduced me to Richard Francis Burton and a lot of historical people that I actually became quite interested in, and a lot of writers. So characters in his Riverworld series include people like Alice Little, the real Alice in Wonderland, and John de Longford. Mark Twain's in there. Lai Po and Tu Fu, if you have never heard of them, those two guys are brilliant. They're like ancient Chinese warrior poets who kind of used to spend a year getting drunk, and then a year womanizing, and then a year fighting, and then a year writing poetry, and that kind of thing. They're quite interesting. So there you go. So yeah, Burton's the man. A great anthropologist, Vikram and the Vampire. So you can look at Richard Burton in all sorts of ways. And if you want a bit of trivia, if you ever look at the Tomb Raider film with Angelina Jolie, the tomb of her father in that film is the real mausoleum of Richard Francis Burton, which is at Mortlake. So if you're ever on, I think, the Piccadilly line, is it on London going along, you'll go past it, you can see it right out the window. There's a good film about Richard Burton with it's called To the Mountains of the Moon. It's an Irish actor and the guy that played Yelzer Hughes. Bernard Hill's in it. It's quite a good film. But Richard Burton's something else altogether. He's an incredible linguist and anthropologist, and very interested in cultures. And I think if some people take a look at the idea of in Dune, you get this sense of Lawrence of Arabia, the story of Lawrence of Arabia overlaid. Lawrence and Burton are of the same cloth, but Lawrence pales in comparison vastly to Richard Burton. Was Butler influenced by Young or Young by Butler? It's got to be the other way around because of dates randomity. I often thought about this. It was one of the places I went straight away because we have so much of this collective unconscious. These ideas bounded by Butler, I think it has to be the other way around. But if we look at the study of mythology and the way it goes along, there's a thing that I suppose the psychoanalysts and the psychologists have latched onto, and you can see this in Jungian. We've talked about this in Jungian and Freudian psychology. Is that they're very invested, or that they seem to be heavily interested in mythology and use it as a tool to produce theories, etc. And with Freud, it's of course the Oedipus myth, which is badly misinterpreted, seems to be quite ignorant of. And with Jung, the archetypes of the collective unconscious are based on Greek mythology, on myths from the classical world in particular. And again, the terms are archetype, etc. So I think there's an obvious link between the men. And then if you take that on, if you look at Joseph Campbell, if I get his name right, and his work in the hero of a thousand faces, that is so heavily influenced by Jung's work on the collective unconscious, the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And yeah, there's a lot of associations. You can see that particularly in Frank Herbert's Dune as well. There's a lot of use of Jungian mandalas and spirals. We talked about the spiral of behavior and action. And there's a lot of these motifs in there as well. So there we go. Let me see. So that was a few books anyway. Sean, I think I had a wee brief look at you were talking about Julian Jaynes by Cameron 9 to do with Homer. And I'm no expert on the man, haven't read it, but I looked at sort of the conclusions that he thinks that, correct me if I'm wrong, that he thinks that consciousness begins about 2000 BCE due to writing. And there's a few things in that article that just struck me as really badly iconotropic, but simply fact Homer didn't write a single word. And the actual translations of Homer can be tricky. So I thought that, but obviously then we have stories that go back much further than that. And well, I suppose I would say I wouldn't agree with his ideas on consciousness, but it's one of those things. I don't know why it's always. If someone can answer me this, why is it always the psychoanalytical people that keep using mythology from the Greek world to get things badly wrong? But it's them in particular, and I don't know. I can't think of any other group of professionals that do this. And they're all so into their younger Freud camps. I think Philip K. Dick's a good person to look at that, by the way. And I think there's a wee thing about Freud and Blade Runner when tell me about using only good words, everything you remember about your mother. And the guy goes, Leon steps up and goes, "Is it your mother? Let me tell you about my mother," and just shoots him twice. And I think that's a very interesting scene in Blade Runner. But the internet say, yeah, folks. Has anybody got any questions? Fire away. I don't think I'm going to stay too late tonight. I'm sure you maybe have all things to do on Friday. So I chat here all night, folks, every day. I was thinking if I was doing a marathon of these, I should have maybe done it for charity or something. Let me tell you about my mother. Boom. That's exactly it. I mean, there's an indictment against Freud. I don't know if it's from writing, but this claim is that our inner monologue wasn't always recognized as our own voice, and that previously people thought it was the voice of God directing them. Our inner monologue wasn't always recognized as our own voice. That's interesting. Still some high percentage of people, something like that, claim to have no inner monologue at all. Well, it's just you if you can't hear yourself, I think, It's I don't know if you know something about here's one for you, Sean. I don't know if you know the riddle of the Sphinx from the Oedipus myth. I'll give it to you. Most people think this is it. Most people think what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening. And most people think that's what the Oedipus, the riddle of the Sphinx is. Does everybody know this riddle? By the way, it's quite famous. The answer is man, by the way. But the riddle's not complete. Just in terms of what, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. So the answer is man because when he's a baby, he crawls on all 4s. In the middle of his life, he walks about on 2 legs. And when you're an old man, you use a stick. That's the 3 legs. So, but the riddle is actually what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening, and has a voice. And I just thought that was kind of interesting in terms of what you're saying about the inner monologue. And always recognise as our own voice. I do get what you're saying there, but I think just based on what he was saying within, and again, I would have to read this. I can't really comment, but the dates that he gave, I can tell you that there's plenty of literature that he kind of said that it has to happen within this time frame. There's plenty of stuff before that, and something that I think is a wee bit hard for people to conceive of sometimes is with history means something different to me than it probably does to you guys. So I'll tell you what Historia means to me. History is to inquire into something. History is not things that happened in the past, and it never has been. Things that happen in the past are things that happened in the past, and they either happened or they didn't. History is the process of looking into any given matter and trying to figure out what happened. Um, so our knowledge of the past is fluid. It changes on a daily basis, and I think we were saying also the BAMs the other night, we also lose knowledge on a daily basis. We can see the destruction of artifacts and buildings from the ancient world in the Middle East at the minute to wipe out a narrative of history. Um, Terry Pratchett mocked that riddle in the Discord. What, did he have a different version of it? Grimdark. Napoleon supposedly said history is a set of lies agreed upon. I think that language is key in the evolution of abstract and complex thought. Oh, I totally agree there, randomly. But language exists in many, many forms. And I think that's interesting. The one thread that ties all of my different degrees together, I suppose, is language. Didn't appreciate the when I read it, but it does work in other media. So yeah, things that we know about the past. Sometimes we dig something up, and it changes what we thought we knew. So particularly if you're dealing with the ancient world, you've really got to keep an open mind. And I'd say that the lifespan of any of those kinds of degrees is about 10 years before your knowledge, whatever you thought you knew, will have changed. So we're always finding new artifacts, and hopefully I really hope that there's more stories to be found or discovered. And if you understand that, I suppose that the dark ages that emerged out of the fall of the Roman Empire and how much we lost from that point, that the Renaissance that kicks off is the kind of return of all of that Greek and Roman knowledge that was very much copied by Arabian scholars, fortunately. But there's many things lost. I'd say there's a fair chunk of bits of Egypt under sand for a long time, and civilization gets to a point, I suppose, where we start getting. But we have complex mathematics in the 5000 BC. And for example, if you look into things like Pythagoras' theorem and think that Pythagoras it's not his theorem at all, and generally his name is associated with it because I think people believe that he's the first person to provide a proof for that. But if you move out of the Greek cultural sphere, move over to Mesopotamia and Egypt, you'll find Pythagoras' theorem existing a long, long, long time before him. A good 1,000 years at least, I think. So if you have a look at the history of fractions, for example, Egyptian fractions, and Mesopotamian mathematics, Sumerian mathematics as well. If you look at cuneiform and their, simply put, they use sexagesimal, which is base 60, and we still use that for our clocks today. It's quite interesting because if you think about how they counted, 60 is one of the most factorizable numbers. The way they used to count was instead of way we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they would use the different points of your digits. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you can use your thumb as a marker, and that gives you 24 hours in a day, 12 hours in separations, and so on. Which is interesting if you think about how a lot of the ancient people thought about things and measured things. Like the Homeric epics are written in what's called dactylic hexameter. So dactyl's your finger, and hexameter means 6, if you like, and the dactyl is, for want of a better, There you go. It's a long, I don't know if you can see that, a long syllable and two short ones, just like the shape of your finger. And that's why they call it that, you know. Language, I think, goes back. You've got narratives on cave paintings going back to 18,000 BC, even further, and conscious thought. Um, so if you want to understand that, then the oldest form of literature itself is sequential art, which is, in other words, a comic book. um, so there you go. No, I think human intelligence, conscious thought. I suppose that the idea of consciousness and what we talk about it has had to take a different shift, and I'd argue that that's a lot to do with the talk of what we've always considered the soul within religion. I think there's the body, mind, body, and soul, but to be honest with you, I don't know souls are, but your consciousness is the question of consciousness is probably the most important one that science has got to answer, and we haven't really spent too much time looking at it, to be honest. So, at the beginning of Messiah, a historian was imprisoned for heresy for his opinions of Paul and the jihad. Well, if you think about it, the Atreides, historians and historicity is pretty important to the Dune universe, isn't it? Is it Bronzo of Ix with the god Ember and so on? And it's an interesting thing that Harry Benito, is that it? Benotto? Sorry, thank you, Randomity. I'm probably mixing up with something else. Oh, is that the historian that they imprisoned? Harry Benotto. The Atreides control propaganda, absolutely. I'm reading through that bit again in Dune at the minute, and I've just got to the point where Paul has ceased to be Paul and has become Muad'Dib when he emerges from the still tent. But they very much control their own understanding of the control of myth, that narrative part of propaganda. The Atreides very much have a propaganda machine. It's within the text. Reading it again, they're fully geared military and political operation. So yeah, I think they control the narrative, and particularly if you look whenever we get to the god Emperor, there's a desire from him very much to control the narrative of things. But history is to inquire into something. So that history begins, I suppose, with a lot of people think it begins with Herodotus and the Historia. And that's a work that was often miscredited and considered to be the father of all lies. And my understanding is that the work that's been done on it has proven that Herodotus is indeed a bona fide historian. Truth suffers from too much analysis. Ancient friend saying, Frank Herbert, Dune Messiah. Somebody pointed out, if you want to take the wit and wisdom of Frank Herbert, that there are an awful lot of amazing flaws in it. A lot of the time he's borrowing wit and wisdom from, axioms and all sorts of phrases, words from phrase and fable and stuff like that. And not every bit of wisdom that comes out of the ancient world is good. Truth suffers from too much analysis. Truth is the truth, I think. But truth's a very interesting thing, I think. A lot of people set store in it and actually don't behave very truthfully. So the old family motto of the Sloan family is Viad Veritate, which means by truth and by force and by truth, actually. Herodotus admitted he couldn't verify the accuracy of what he's writing. Absolutely, but it's the way he can gather his sources. But my understanding is the work is that other people have managed to. Yeah, it's to do with the tie-ins of local flavour to his stories. And he is trying to gather source material. It's how he operates. The reason why Thucydides doesn't like him is Thucydides doesn't think. Thucydides is the guy that comes along after him with the history of the Peloponnesian War. He thinks that Herodotus shouldn't be writing trying to write a flowery book, a book that's well written, has literary chops, because that's exactly what Herodotus's Historia does have. So, and he thought you can't be a historian and be entertaining at the same time. So it is one of those things that time goes by. He's alternately called the father of lies or the father of history, but certainly how he goes about things, I think, is a good beginning to history. Uh, so there we go. Has anyone got any questions on me for me about the video tonight or anything else like that? We're well off topic. We're all over the place, aren't we? Uh, let's see if did I scribble down something at all. I was thinking about. I suppose there's always we were talking about these controversies in the press the other day. I had a couple of thoughts on one of them. Was that I think a lot of people have been concerned that something to do with Chani being the main protagonist of Dune Part Two, and it seemed to have a lot of people in a bit of a tizzy. I don't know what you guys think, and I'm sure you all know your Dune quite well. And I kind of I thought it was one of those things that was interesting that it was is Paul the protagonist or chat who's the, and I think somebody pointed out Paul ends up in a coma for 3 weeks. Pardon me. I thought it was interesting because I don't know who you think the protagonist of the Dune series is, but I like to think it's you. Um, you're the protagonist of Dune, and I don't know what you think about this, but it's so you really play a bigger role, not the protagonist. See, a protagonist and antagonist, and all. Is Paul a protagonist at all? Um, yeah, those are good terms. Protagonist, antagonist, and agon. Agon, Reed, and Aristaya are. Do you prefer the first or the second trilogy? Oh, I prefer the first trilogy. Aqua Baby. It seems like a woke agenda to make the native woman POC the center of the story instead of Paul. To be honest. Oh, well, I was just thinking about it in terms of the book. Paul is certainly not the hero. No, he's not. The question is he? What I think that the terms that were being used, Sean, and Grimdark and Aqua Baby, was the protagonists. And again, I have particular opinions about that. Those terms. Agon is the struggle, isn't it? It's so, yeah, it's the character pro for the struggle against the struggle. The thing I thought is that there is no real protagonist, and if you go through the narrative, we obviously shift main characters, and it's not point of view really thing like George R. R. Martin would do. I actually think that you, the reader, are the protagonist, and I know what we're saying. That this kind of the should we make the it does make sense that a lot of Paul is internalized. Zen Sunni to Zen Sufi and Precedence to no technology. Along with the relationship of Duncan to different female characters, which some sorry, I've got a thread here. The switch from Zen Sunni to Zen Sufi, Sufism and Zen Sunni, precedence to no technology, along with the relationship of Duncan to different female characters, which some must have been his descendants, I found unexpectedly entertaining. I really do like the second trilogy of the books. I actually think Dune Messiah and particularly Dune and Dune Messiah are so tight. I think they almost should be in one book. I think it's and Children of Dune's a very satisfying continuation of that and setting up the next thing. God Emperor really stands on its own, I think, in some ways, and it is linked to Children of Dune. Well, I totally enjoy going with the Bene Gesserit books as well, and I like the fact that the point is to show you a really long-term, situation. I think within the Dune universe. So I really and the female characters, the whole sexual pulsing and all of that stuff. I found it quite entertaining. I actually found it a little bit of a shift for Frank, who I find doesn't write sex scenes very well. I think it's one of his flaws. I'm afraid. I don't think he knows how to do the sex scene in the book. But I suppose it's one of those things that publishers sometimes demand of their writers. But because particularly there's a lot of cookie sex in science fiction from the 60s onwards, I think. But and again, we don't get the payoff, I think, which is sad. But no, I really do enjoy the Bene Gesserit books. But if you're asking me to pick a trilogy, I'll go with the first one really. which is sad because I would be gutted at leaving out God Emperor of Dune. Weird to say though. Burbella and Duncan sexy. I can remember back about all I remember is I haven't read this in a long time. But I remember sort of penile pulsing and vaginal pulsing and sexual imprinting, and it was all about, and she imprint. But no, he turned the tables on her imprint. I don't know. It was quite comical, I thought, and nearly all science fiction writers are cringe about sex scenes. I've got something interesting for you, Sean. I'll tell you what. I don't know if it's here. I know they give out. This is a very good wee book, by the way, folks. If you like science fiction and fantasy, now this book is absolutely. If I open this, it'll sadly fall to bits. I'll have to get some tape on it, and it's called "The Complete Book of Science Fiction and Fantasy Lists" by Maxim Jakubowski and Malcolm Edwards. And it's one of those fun books, but just in terms of what you're talking about, science fiction writers and sex, it's got quite a bit of science fiction writers who churn out the sexy novels, if you like. I think even there's a bunch of them that are Mills and Boon writers or something, and I always kind of enjoyed that idea. That I think it's quite funny. But yeah, sex and science fiction can be totally bizarre. Would the honor matters to be the antithesis of the Bene Gesserit? They are very much, I think, to be an antithesis, yeah, maybe, but they're very much a dark side of the Bene Gesserit, I think, with no control. I think they're wild, aren't they? But I imagine they'd be very, very sort of. I think their sexual nature would be very kind of dominatrix and sort of BDSM type thing. That kind of they're and again, sex as a weapon. I think the honor matches are a really good. They're quite harsh and brutal. And what I like about them is within Dune, I suppose you're used to plans within plans within plans, and the Machiavellian twists and turns. They want to just blow them up, blow them up. That's something I quite like about the honor matches. They gather information, but they're quite happy to wipe people out. God Emperor has the best quotes on the nature of political power, almost Herbert's mouthpiece, like Heinlein does in his novel. Yes, I agree. I think it's because it's the self-reflecting nature of the commentary of the God Emperor, I think, Sean. And not only that, the God Emperor's commentary is also a commentary of Leto on his father. So there's a lot of I think God Emperor is the most philosophical of books, and I really if you're interested in that kind of thing, evolution. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a god, if such a thing can exist? I think it's a cracking book, but I'll look at the nature of power from an ultimate tyrant. And a benevolent tyrant at that. He's not as bad as he could be, I suppose. Hello, Guillermo. The way that his store man's memories is quite disturbing. Yeah, I think I'm not too sure about how specifically the honored mantra is, but the whole point of restoring the memories, I think, is it can be done well. But there's a crisis point, isn't there? Required has to be something shocking and disturbing, or that level of shock, if you like, to actually get that kind of, to restore the original personality. Again, I'm a wee bit out of date with some of this stuff, and I'm trying to remember from many years ago. Randomity says the first Dune book presents a very detailed world outlined in its appendix, glossary, and so forth. Much of that seems to have been dismissed from Dune Messiah on. The appendices of Dune are very important, I think. And I just started rereading Dune again, as I said. I think I told you where I'm up to just after Mawadi, where Paul emerges from the still tent. If you've read The Dragon in the Sea, which is also called Under Pressure, which is also called 21st Century Sub, that's Frank's first book. The whole still tent scene is a recreation of the submarine scene from the first book. There's an awful lot in The Dragon in the Sea, folks, and I wrote some stuff in a notebook that I have for it, and I'll see if I can dig it out to you, my thoughts on it, and I think I referenced some of it. But there's an awful lot of what appears in Dune the Dragon in the Sea is almost Frank's trial run for that. And it's almost a recreation of the scene. Instead of a tent, it's, I suppose, a birthing canal for a submarine. And I think it's very interesting that Jesse is in the tent with him as he's reborn as Muad'Dib. But the appendixes are really good, and I think that the whole Tarot Kines thing, as we said, reads like a mini adventure. I suppose if you had different people might consider how to film Dune, but it would be possible that you could use that as a prologue, if you know what I mean. Very impulsive. I think maybe is that what you mean? Is that the Honored Matres are pretty impulsive? Yeah, they're impulse and chaos, aren't they? So the the appendices are really good, and it does flesh out. And again, they're done like kind of official reports, and we have obviously the glossary of terminology. I think is really good. I enjoy books like that, and I think it's certainly a trope in fantasy and science fiction. A book with a map, things like that are very intriguing to me. I quite like cartography, and I think the thing that did that was Tolkien's original Hobbit with the map of Middle Earth in it, the original hand-drawn one. I think is beautiful. Very detailed word, and we seem to miss it. Yeah, at the same time, out of those appendices, they really are very important. I think we have little things that are set up. As I said, Herbert's. I'm not understanding really how the time frame works, but he took 5 years to research and get ready and write Dune to get it out there. So it appearing in '63. But the understanding is that he'd always conceived of the first 3 books together. And I think a lot of what's in the glossaries and the appendix there maybe setups for later on. Riches, the House of Riches, is a very obvious one. I think that's just and I think there are things in there that are just going to be little parts of little just notes or things, casual asides, and I think whenever you encounter terms within Dune, you're encountering words from several different languages. And we have Arabic terms in there, we have Germanic terms, we have English and Irish terms. There's all sorts of words in there, and it helps to have a wee glossary to go and refer to them and get a bit of explanation. And sometimes he alters them slightly, But yeah, the whole Gola thing I think is quite bizarre and quite cruel anyway. But cruelty is a fundamental part of the Dune universe, I think. I'll tell you what, folks. I'll take a couple more questions if you like, and then I will call it a day. I think because it is a late one. So I hope that's not a bother to anybody. But we'll be back tomorrow. Honored Matres and some of the sisters are more impulsive with so many characters on their own. Yeah, it does become a bit of a chase sequence, isn't it? And I think isn't it it's starting to come back to me. It's a race to kind of save the full the Bene Gesserit, the other memory, from one of the houses, isn't it? Their planet, and if I can remember rightly, then it involves a wild Reverend Mother of the Jews. I think is it Rebecca, possibly. I just called some people in case they wanted to. Oh well, I'll keep chatting. We'll tell you what. We'll go on for a wee bit, but that's very kind of you. Thank you. I said, tomorrow's next video will be about. I think it starts with the Ixion technology. I'm pretty sure. And that's the main and how that evolves, and that technology really being one of the main foundations of the Dune universe. Where the Honored Matres obtain their obliterator weapon and the biological weapon they used against the BG, God knows. I'd imagine that if you're like anybody, and if you understand warfare, randomity, you don't need anything to win a war. You just take what you need from your opponent, and that's a very true thing. Your enemy should have everything you need. 3 days of food, and go kill them and take what you want. I'd imagine. I don't know. Again, it's just my memory's a wee bit old on this stuff. I think of all the books really because I had to abandon the work on sex and gender, but particularly the Bene Gesserit books. That's the 2 books that I've read the least. But I'd have to get to God Ember to run along into them. Just call something. What did I want to mention? So yeah, and I always thought it was quite bizarre. By the way, I don't know what you think. The fact that Arrakis is destroyed. Um, yeah, genuinely, folks, what do you think about that? Frank Herbert blowing up Arrakis. Um, yes, Lynn's maneuvers warfare is very good on that. Same with the fourth generation. I'm just first in all the ancient generals, mate. um, God Emperor June's the perfect book, although they did Moneo dirty. I didn't like his demise. Jewish. Oh, does he just die with the God Emperor on the bridge? I think I can't remember. Jewish wild rabbit mother in hiding, Duncan in hiding, a very tense read at times. Yeah, and I quite like the way, and it's another jump, isn't it? Another evolutionary jump because the I suppose the implication, if I can remember correctly, is some kind of pogrom against the Jews in that book, and I think that she's got the collective memory of those. I can't remember what they're called. What like a sect of Judaism or something. And the idea that this character, who's a wild Jewish Reverend Mother, is a natural. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, folks, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think is a naturally evolved Reverend Mother, and so she represents an evolutionary shift for the Bene Gesserit that occurs at that time. And again, I don't think they saw it coming at all. So yeah, funny how these things keep going back to you. And I actually thought within the whole Orange Catholic Bible, within the whole, I mean, I've used wee images within to discuss the CET and the religious aspects, but we've got the Judaism is included in that. Pardon me, but I thought Judaism was very much, you don't hear much of it in the Dune universe, especially in relation to the Commission of Ecumenical Translators and the CET and the Butler and Jihad, etc. So I often thought that was a kind of note. Whenever the Jewish Reverend Mother turns up, that community of Jews in the book, I thought, aha, there they are. Where have they been? I always thought it was a notable. But I suppose there's so many cultures and religions that aren't mentioned in Dune. Yeah, and I think there's kind of analogs there. Fundamentally, I don't know if you agree, but Dune, as much as Dune is an anti-war novel as well. And Dune can be read on so many levels. The very first Dune book is also a buildings roman. It is literally a coming of age book. How does Moneo die, Guillermo? I hope I'm pronouncing your name okay. Guillermo, I hope that's correct. Does he fall from the bridge with Leto? I think at the very end. I can't remember. Or is he crushed by Leto or something? And then the brouhaha. Very tense read at times. Yeah. Aqua Baby, I'll tell you this, folks. If you do like your Frank Herbert, as well as his other books, or would be interested in his other books, there's a body of literature about submarines, and a bunch of it is science fiction, going back to Jules Verne, and so on. And the worm finally crushed Moneo. Thank you, Randolph. Yeah, that's kind of sad. It's reminiscent of what we were talking about, Jason and the Argonauts, having the ship's keel fall on his head and crush him. One of the things I thought I'd mention, actually, by the way, is we were talking about Irish mythology the other day, the nature of worms in religion, and I suppose you have that whenever people look at Dune, we identify certain religions, certain cultures, certain societies, and things like that. Particularly with the Fremen, we have this the Zen Sunni, so we have a combination of Zen Buddhism, Sufi Islam, and there's certain things within them that they worship a worm. And I think we talked about the nature of Leto the segments, the Abraxas coin that you'll see in the videos, and if you type it in on Google, you'll Abraxas coin, 3rd century coins. I think the Coptic. You'll go, wow, there's Leto the Second on a 1700-year-old coin. What's he doing there? I think that's quite interesting. But worms have an association in Irish mythology, and if you understand St. Patrick and the myth with him, that he supposedly drove out all the snakes from Ireland. There are no snakes in Ireland, but we did have a pagan cult called who worshipped a worm god, and the worm god's name is Crom Croch, and it is the same Crom, by the way, as from the world of Conan, and so we have a castle Crom here. It's spelt differently slightly. And I actually thought that the nature, so the idea of St. Patrick wiping out the snakes is it's kind of an Elijah moment. It's him wiping out the worshippers of Crom Croch, this worm serpent. Um, so that there's a few things about worms which are quite interesting, and again in folk tales and mythology. And I just thought I'd mention that one, by the way, because it's an interesting one from my own point of view, because something right, my dog Holly was found at a crossroads up there at Castle Crom. In fact, she walked out and collapsed in the middle of the road in front of my car. So I stuck her in the boot and brought her home. We've had her ever since. But just down from the tower there, and we found her on a crossroads, and she is a dog. And if you know anything about Irish mythology, dogs at crossroads are associated with the Lady Morrigan and so on. In Roman mythology, her name is Trivia. So Trivia is the goddess of. So these are equivalent goddesses of Hecate, by the way, and they're all the same goddess, if you like. So the Romans call the Greeks call her Hecate, which you probably know, but the Romans call her Trivia, and her name tri, meaning three, via, three roads. So Trivia is the goddess of crossroads, sorcery, and hounds. If you want a piece of trivia, by the way. So that's where we found my dog, and one of my dogs. Rescued both my dogs, but she's fine. That's where we found her, and particularly interesting. And if you ever know the association with worms and in Celtic mythology, some of you may know a beer called Krombacher, which is a German Pilsner, and if you look at their label, Krombacher, you'll see the worm leading up to the tower. It's quite interesting. So there's so much in Dune, and we keep drifting into the mythology thing, I suppose, and I hope that's not too annoying for you folks. Has anyone got any other questions? Fire away on all sorts of things. I'm enjoying this as usual. I hope you're all keeping well. It's Friday night here. It's coming up to midnight, the witching hour. You're not allowed to feed me after midnight. But the worm finally crushed Maneo. Yeah, Maneo's a great character, I think. And the hello VT31008, how are you? Maneo is, I mean, he's an Atreides as well, and he's a major domo, isn't he? Yeah, he's an interesting character, and he's just one of those ones. He's also a boon companion to the. Maneo reminds me of something. I'm trying to think of who is it that always has to get out of their way when their master freaks out. It's there is. No, haven't seen the new movie. That's well, Meryl. We're doing a countdown here, I suppose, every night, and I'm running all of these PH.D. but one a night, and the trick is to do it until the film comes out. If you're off, Aqua, maybe have a good night yourself, and thank you for joining us. Take care, and all the best. So no, I haven't seen the new movie at all, and I'll not be able to see it until the 21st of. What month's this? So the 21st of October. Cyberpunk, I believe. All the best. Oh, Lito was Cyberpunk, I believe. What do you think of Brian Herbert Dune books versus his father's books, VT? I get asked this quite a lot. I think they're fine. I've read the let me see. So I've read the two books, Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. And I suppose we should probably include The Road to Dune as well, because it's got their stamp on it. And then I read the first three of their Dune books, which I enjoyed well enough. It was, I suppose, nice to revisit the universe and see what they did with it. House Atreides, House Harkonnen, sorry, and House Corino. And I enjoyed them as much as I think anybody else would enjoy them. I keep saying this. I don't want to keep rattling out. My only problem with them was that the authorial voice sounded a bit different. But no, they can write books, and they're perfectly good writers. And it depends on what you know. It is a bit pulp fiction though, and I don't want to detract from the gentleman's work. They do write well, and modern writing has lots of tools that can assist, I think. Um, so no, I've no bother, but it is one of those things. There's an awful lot of them there, but a lot of science fiction writers, I suppose, will do this. So I think the only grief he really gets for all of this is being Frank's son, and that he's ruled with it. But he did write with his father and work with his father, and it's a pale pastiche compared to Frank Herbert's prose. It's very stylistically different, and it's not just Brian's work. What the other thing I suppose you have to remember is it's two people writing a book. And they're writing it patchwork and putting it together, and so there's another author at work there, and I don't know. Dune's a very complicated universe, I think, so it can be very easy to get lost in it. But I think the man. I'll be honest with you. We were talking about all sorts of issues the other day, and there's an awful lot of venom and vehemence against some people and some ideas and stuff. And I think it's a wee bit. I think it's a wee bit sad, and I'm sure it's maybe a wee bit hurtful for him. I sent my PhD to him about 11 years ago, sort of saying and I've never tried to tout or pimp my PhD, just to anybody who was interested, or I thought was interested, for example, and I haven't sent it to that many people. We were talking the other day that Cara Kennedy, who's on DuneScholar.com, is the other academic who's done a PhD on Dune. She's the only person to ever respond to me, ever. And even just a sorry, we're not interested. So, but I kind of said it to him because I, as much as my work is conducted without bias, I wanted to see what he thought of it, and simply put that I thought I don't know what you think, folks, but I think my work is very respectful to Frank Herbert, and I don't believe that criticism needs to be intellect's revenge on art. I went about my business very honestly, and I'm very impressed by Frank Herbert on his Dune series, and that's why I decided to do a PhD on it. I actually picked it because I like difficult things, and I don't do things the easy way. And I noted a lot of people, people doing PhDs in literature and stuff, and they might go pick something like, the poems of Sylvia Plath written on a Thursday or something like that. They can get a very narrow focus. And I really wanted something that I could absolutely get my teeth into. And I knew Herbert's work well enough that philosophically, and intellectually I could get into it, enjoy it, because there's so much to talk about, so much to analyze. So I know Brian's work is a pale pastiche, as Rand Dominic says. It's often seen as a pale pastiche compared to Frank Herbert's prose. I think that's the real problem, and that they're very different, and it is partly to do with that authorial voice of the books, the tone. And as I said, I think Willis McNally seemed to get it right, and there are other writers who can work at this and get it right. I'll tell you something terrible if you want, and this wasn't me, by the way, but I don't know if any of you like Bill and Ted. I'm a massive fan, and I don't say that I'm a fan very often, but I absolutely love Bill and Ted. And I think of Bill and Ted as being something very clever. Someone once described me, pick any passage from Frank Herbert's Dune and read it out loud, and then take one of the new ones, the historices, the histories, the hagiographies, the biographies, all of these little things at beginnings. And he kind of read one, and he read it in a Bill and Ted voice, and it was something like, I can't remember what he joked, but he read the thing from Frank Herbert's Dune, one of the opening passages, and it sounded really impressive and had gravitas and authority like Frank, like that they do. And he read it, and I think he said something like, the Bene Gesserit are mostly all women. And I think that was the level of that he put it at. And this was a long time ago, by the way, and I thought it was very funny, but because I do like my Bill and Ted, I think. And I don't know if any of you are into Bill and Ted, but if you haven't seen the new film, I thought it was a very satisfactory, I really enjoyed it. I loved it. And if you have seen it and you haven't sat to the end, then the actual very last scene of Bill and Ted was totally brilliant. I loved it. and the two girls playing Little Bill and Little Ted. Absolutely, again, totally nailed it. They're so funny. It's so fantastic. I've been into Bill and Ted since I was at school. I used to behave like that at school. And I've often pretended that I'm quite stupid for a large proportion of my life. Um, so there we go. But it can be a bit harsh, I think, on the man, and it's a pity. I like that about Leto saying it was a horrible bus. Yeah, there's something of is it Mineo and Leto the second? There's something of Smithers and Mr. Burns or something like that, isn't it? Excellent fond memories of it as a kid, but I haven't seen the new one. I highly recommend it, and it was made during COVID, Sean. So it's one of those where you'll notice people socially distancing in it. But it's like one of those. So many of these film franchises that we come to from 30 years in the past, and they've been massacred. And only a few of them have done well. The Mad Max Fury Road was a game changer. I think just why it didn't win Best Film at the Oscars is beyond a joke, and because it smacked every filmmaker in the world in the face, and I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. Um, and the reimagining of Dread, it couldn't have got any worse than the Sylvester Stallone film. Um, but yeah, so we have these old properties from science fiction and fantasy that people get a hold of, and they want to. And I think it was very much in the. I think Keanu Reeves and Alex. Oh, what's his name? Sorry. Oh dear, I don't want to do the man on Injustice here. Can anybody remind me of the actor that plays? Oh goodness gracious! Can I quickly do this without losing you? Come on. Alex, there we go. I don't know, do you lose me when I do that, or can you still see me okay? Alex Winter, so sorry to Alex Winter if he ever sees this. Excellent, yes, fun. Also, I'm a guitar player. So I think Kenny Reeves and Alex Winter had a big hand in it, and I think the choice of the two actresses to play Little Bill and Little Ted was brilliant, and I think the ending for who Bill and Ted are, the ending is so satisfactory and so Bill and Ted. I absolutely loved it. I was so happy. The Blade Runner 2049, yeah, it had good payoff, didn't it, Sean? I thought it was the ending just. You wonder, is he going to lose himself in this? Where is it going to go? And the ending is, I liked it a lot. It was it had made real sense. We get to see the Kipple wastes and stuff like that a bit more. I thought it was a wee bit clean. The future looks too clean for the dark gritty future that we saw before. The newer Dread film is very smartly done, says Sean. Enjoyed that a lot, especially slow-mo as a psychedelic. Yeah, and it's one of these films, I suppose people talking about the whole need for strong female characters and stuff. 2008 has always produced strong female characters, going way back. And I think both Mad Max, Fury Road, and Dread the movie managed to give, I think, for women, I think did more than any films in a long time in terms for actresses taking the lead and not shoving any kind of let's make the a gender or anything down. Very powerful roles, and I think often when we swap over female to male and stuff like that, it's not there are strong female characters out there, and they're original female characters. And I don't know what you guys think, but I think Judge Anderson and Dredd and Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road have got to be two of the best possible female role models to come out of Hollywood, if it is Hollywood really, for a long time. We'll call it the sin of the movie industry, and the Dread actually kind of making it more futuristic. Dread's become looks a bit more closer to today, but yeah, it was a very clever film, and the pacing of it and stuff, and a proper introduction to Judge Dredd's world. But you needed an actor who's Carl Urban, thank goodness. If you know anything about Judge Dredd, you never get to see his face, and the only time you have seen his face is it's like been surgery or something like that, you know. But yeah, they're good films, but I think a lot of these other properties that they try to reboot and stuff, I think it's not been going well, not successful, and I haven't really enjoyed them. I got into the new Star Trek films and watched them a bit, and I was absolutely appalled with the Star Trek Into Darkness. Um, just that's Wrath of Khan. You've just remade the film, and what have you done? You know. Who is it that comes in the reboot these franchises? Nobody. It's always plagiarism. Rob Iger has an excellent video on why Ripley from the Alien franchise is the ideal feminist here without being patronised or ham-fisted. Absolutely. See that I think these the female characters like this do they're the best female characters. Female heroes are female heroes. They don't need to be explained to be female heroes or highlighted. You know. I absolutely enjoy it. Ian Banks's books for a long time have female heavy protagonists. Yeah, science fiction in particular does produce strong female characters, strong female protagonists, strong female villains as well. I thought, Mama as a villain in Dread was incredible. Lena Headey, is it? And that bit with her going nuts with the miniguns is you do not want to mess with her. She's a very worthy villain for Judge Dredd, I think. And the slow-mo was fantastic, wasn't it? The whole boo and that use of 3D. And I think what was really good about Dredd was that the use of 3D was so limited, they didn't go nuts with it, you know. But there we go, folks. So we've been chatting away. Has anyone got any other Dune questions or sci-fi questions at all? A lot of people don't talk too much about the Dune mini-series, by the way, I think. And I'm trying to remember the name of the actor there. I'm very bad with actors' names and things. Is Alec Newman who played Paul Atreides. I thought he did a very good job. I suppose in terms of actually how we've got to see Paul Atreides into Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, I actually thought that how he went from that. I thought that how he went into being the Emperor, I thought was very good. I think he did it very well. Ripley's a great character, I think, and has also become a bit of a stereotype. But there's no need to play up Ripley in any shape or form. And I think, oddly enough, I think what James Cameron did with Ripley's character in Aliens, I thought was very good. Ripley's an outstanding female character, I think, within science fiction. Poor Moneo getting flattened. I was just looking back at these characters. Yeah. So there we go. Slow-mo. Again, we might be doing a wee episode at some point once we get through all this. I wanted to do a wee episode on science fiction drugs of different types. Particularly with melange is one of the sort of science fiction's granddaddy drugs, if you like. James Cameron and Joss Whedon had a strong preference for writing female leads. Yes, they do. Joss Whedon's female leads aren't very old. I think is that Joss Whedon's Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly, etc. So is it kung fu kicking teenage girls, etc. That kind of thing. Well, listen, folks. I'll tell you what. Well, I think we'll have to call it a night there, right? Because it's just hit midnight, and we've got a few wee bits and pieces to do for the morning. And I've got to get me doggies out. But thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow, I think this chapter was really one that just introduced. Here we go with all the evolution of technology. So I think we'll be piling into the Dune universe and its tech in pretty much good detail tomorrow. So I hope you can join me. I'm just going to keep going all the way to the 21st of October, doing this every night. So some episodes are longer, some are shorter. But we'll try and pop on live after each episode so that the times might change a wee bit. But thank you very much all for joining me. Lovely chatting to you again. And it's really nice that you're joining me here each week. This feels great. It's kind of almost feels like a bit like a radio station. I feel like I should stick a tune on now to play you all out. But you guys have a great one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on here tomorrow night. Thank you very much for joining me, and Shlanta, and all the best. Good night, folks. Good night.